Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Industry, an esports insider podcast where I speak to people and personalities within the scene. Today, I'm joined by Michael Ashford, the CEO of Esports Awards, where we'll be talking about Esports Awards. Why are they important? The process that goes within creating not only the events, but also the nominations and everything in between. And also kind of just a general overview of Esports Awards and how it's important to recognize people within the industry. But first, before we jump into all of that, Michael, how are you?
I am very well, thank you, sir. Very excited to be with you today. Big fan of the pod, and loving being a part of it today.
Yeah, we were just talking about, going through all of these things. I was kind of rushing you. I was like, come on, I really want to just get talking about all this stuff. But I'm going to actually hold myself back a little bit, and I want you to talk a little bit as well, actually, Mike. For people who are unaware of you, could you kind of give people a bit of a background about kind of, you and with Esports Awards and then you in general as well?
Yeah, definitely. And firstly, I'm terrible at elevator pitches, so won't be very concise in the first instance. But I'm Mike. I'm the CEO of the Esports Awards. I've been CEO for around 2 years now, and previously I was managing director. Previous to that, I was marketing director for the Esports Awards. That's pretty much where my career started, was from a marketing perspective. Went to university in 2010, sort of sat there and thought, hey, what's something in the world that people haven't been doing for long enough that I can be a disruptor? Digital marketing was really where I sort of saw myself at that point. I was sat there saying there isn't people that have done it for 20, 30 years with tons of experience. It's this evolving, developing market, and something I feel like if I learn quick enough, I can keep up with and add a lot of value to. That translated to me running my own agency, working with a lot of blue chips here in the UK, and on the side playing games. I was a big League of Legends player. I was sort of in Diamond trying to be a pro player at one point. Very much realized I wasn't good enough and started to think, well, how do I actually make an impact in this industry? What's going to be my way of giving value back to esports and competitive gaming? And then, fortune favors, and there's a great story behind it, but came to be a part of the Esports Awards and be on this incredible journey over the last 7 years.
So what was it like when you joined the Esports Awards? Because obviously it was way back, was it in 2016? So it was close to when it was being founded, I believe at least close to around then. So what was it like kind of back then? Because I'm guessing it was very startup-y, essentially, It was kind of people with a lot of dreams and a lot of ambitions to kind of do this ceremony that hasn't really been done in esports before.
Exactly that. It was a very different time. There were no foundations, no expectations, and it was incredibly exciting as well at the same point. So I came in slightly late to year one. I'd sort of been working for my own agency. I then moved over and joined another agency at the same time to work on GFIN as they sort of launched their Elite Series. And then Neville at the time at GFIN said, hey, I've got someone you need to talk with. They're doing something that sounds like your passion. You should go and meet them. So I was in London by chance the same day, and I went and met with Tom Mercy in central London. He left a cricket game to come and meet me, and he was basically saying, hey, we've got this awards dinner we're trying to put together, and we don't really have any marketing plan or a rhyme or reason on how we're going to promote it, and we want to find a way to broadcast it. So I sort of came on quite late to the project at that point, but also quite early in the same way, because there was so much left to do. And ultimately, in probably a 40-minute conversation, we built out a lot of what I'd love to do with an award show in competitive gaming. Things that didn't exist at the time. Like within 30 minutes, we were talking about the fact there needs to be a Play of the Month competition within an awards format, because those are the things that matter month on month, that build up to like the big payoff moment at the end of the year, and sort of evolving that format. So it was a very different experience back then, because ultimately there was no playbook, there was no format to follow, and there was no understanding of what people would enjoy and wouldn't enjoy about an awards format for something that they're so passionate about. For me, I always like to relate it to my experience, because I spent, again, a lot of time going to the likes of League of Legends and the World Championships or Rift Rivals or a lot Insomnia and all these different events where you get to experience firsthand what people enjoy about LANs and about bigger tournaments and formats, to try and translate into recognizing them in an award show. We had 16 awards, I believe, in year one, and it was all around that sort of curated experience of how you bring that together. But I think back then it was focused on being a dinner rather than a broadcast. It was very much for those in the room to come together, celebrate, and recognize, as opposed to those at home. And that's been the transition for us. It's very much about those in the room, but now there's also a large scale audience that want to be entertained at home as well. And it's been a real process, sort of figuring out how you blend both. And make sure they both have the best experience possible.
I think it's really interesting what you were saying about kind of the development of just the esports awards in general, but really it kind of coincides with the development of esports. You know, a lot of it back then, 2016, it feels like a while ago in esports, but it's 6 years. You know, but back then it was kind of people who were passionate about it, who had like an expertise within a certain field, but really it was kind of like having to mold it, and that just doesn't apply to esports awards. That applies to tournaments, to even like coaching, to kind of every facet of the esports industry. But how was it kind of like, you know, basically trying to writing that rule book in what is it's essentially now a format for esports awards? Obviously, I'm guessing you looked at a lot of, you know, previous events in like sports and TV. Was there a lot of kind of like research that had to kind of go into to actually think of, okay, how can we not only just make this an esports awards where it's just for gamers kind of thing, but actually for a whole variety of people, where people could actually watch it, essentially, you know, not really know too much about it, but kind of know from it that this is a big thing, much like people would watch. You know, how many people probably watch the Oscars and don't even watch the films which are actually nominated in? You know, it's like, was that something that kind of you thought and the thought process that went into that?
Yeah, it was a big piece of it, because again, it was so new that you had to have that aspiration that this had to be the Oscars of the esports world to make it and for it to matter. And I think that that's where we sort of strived, was how do we add that glitz and the glamour, become the only black tie event in esports that resonates, matters, and hits right. So like the first thing for us from an audience perspective was understanding why people would want an award show and what they'd want to achieve from it. So for us, we always said we had a triangulated audience. You had your esports enthusiasts who live, breathe, and understand the scene outright. They will tune in because they want the gratification of seeing the people they feel should win. And they also want to be able to dispute if they feel people didn't win, and deserve to win, should have in that situation, which leads to healthy debate in most cases. You then have your casual gamers, who are those you just said, right? In similar ways to the Oscars, they may not watch every film, but they enjoy films and they enjoy that industry. They want to keep up, and in 1 3 hour show would love to be able to know what the key beats were. And they're our casual gaming audience. They may vote in a couple of award categories. They'll sort of tune in throughout the year for key moments, key tournaments, but they want our show to be able to tell them who was the best team, who was the best organization, what was the best event, and what were the most relevant things happening in the scene. So they feel up to date and on a board at the level they want to be. And then the last one, really, that I think everyone has started shifting towards is lifestyle gamers. They don't vote very often, but they do view in their abundance, and they want to know who is walking the red carpet, what's going to be the big moment on the night, is there going to be any drama, and all of these different things that we've really seen sort of spike in. So the key from a broadcast perspective was understanding how do we suitably serve each of those audiences and make sure there's a representation that matters for them throughout the show. And that was like a key thing for those. Then it becomes fractured slightly because you have a B2B audience and a B2C audience. You're serving two major audiences that also want something out of 3 hours that you have to curate and give, whether they're in the room or watching from home. So it's been a real challenge, but I think what was probably the most exciting back then is there was no expectation. No one sort of sat there and said, hey, this is what you did the year before, or this is how things have played out in the past. We were being able to make it up and understand it. But with that becomes shortfalls, because one of the key risks I always used to talk about back in 2016 is when we close the curtain and the credits roll and the show's over, how do you know that anyone wants this again next year? How do you know that when you open that curtain, there'll be people sat in the audience and watching at home? And that was like a real fear factor for me, was actually, does this resonate? Does it matter? Because we have to absorb all the cost up front. We have to make sure we've staffed it, planned it, and done everything before we even know if anyone is going to turn up and enjoy it. Which was another major thing for it, is understanding the concept. And realistically, you only get to make so many mistakes as you grow. whilst retaining those people wanting to be in the room. So it was sort of always this balance of wanting to be ambitious and achieve while still staying true to the vision and plan that makes sure that people want to come back and enjoy the show.
Yeah, it's fascinating, really, and thanks for kind of going into depth about the audiences itself. And is that something that, as kind of Esports Awards has grown year and year and year, that you've kind of seen with, the statistics? I guess you could actually find out yourself, really, which is how many people are watching the Esports Awards, and then how many people are voting on the categories themselves. Have you kind of seen that there are more and more people kind of watching, opposed to like the percentage of people voting, and that's growing with each year?
Yeah, I think both have just grown exponentially and probably caused our marketing team some headaches because it's easy to have like 100% growth when the numbers are small. When the metrics start growing, it becomes much more difficult, but people expect it, right? Sponsors expect it, viewership expects it, your broadcasters want it. So for us, we sort of started very humbly in 2016 with around 80,000 people watching and 7,000 people voting. And then fast forwarding to 2021, we had over 10 million people voting and over 21 million people watching, which is insane. And I always say that's a testament to the industry. It's like, we're obviously going to report on it, we're going to celebrate it, but actually for like the whole industry, this is everyone's award show. And it's like to see that growth to where tangibly now there are links to our viewership and the mainstream award shows viewership. It's just a really cool thing to see.
Yeah, and I think as we're talking kind of about the growth, I think something that is really important to discuss, and it's something that has been like quite a recent topic, is the process of esports. Now we're actually going to jump into this little topic now. We're going to split it in two. We're going to talk about the actual process of the award show itself, and then we're going to talk about the event side after that, because I'm guessing two completely different processes in terms of how you have to plan things and how you organize things. But let's first talk about categories then. So how much time is put into selecting the categories?
A lot of time. It's one of the biggest processes that we go through is how we build our panel, we build the categories, we build the criteria, and then how it's evaluated, which is an ever evolving and constant process that doesn't get any easier. We have been phenomenally lucky that this has resonated so much with so many of the experts in the industry who have helped to guide it, because that is the only reason we still exist effectively, is because people said, I care enough about this that I want to volunteer time. We have around 75 people that sit on our panel that volunteer their time week in, week out, month in, month out, to understanding feedback, to listening to the community, to having a finger on the pulse of what is important to recognize every single year, and actually what are some of the key interpretations that should be used in the voting and evaluation process. So every year we sit down in January and we have our internal committee that work for the Esports Awards, that basically act as a bridge between our internal team and the panel that are obviously volunteer and external positions, on understanding their feedback, what awards they want, how they think it should work, how we shape them, how this adapts and evolves based on reception to the show, based on what people want, based on trying to keep this as pure as it possibly can be. And they sort of interpret that with them, agree a correlation of what awards categories matter, what groups they should be separated into, and then what criteria fit to build out that shortlist effectively of which awards happen. I think there's been some crazy growth over the years to it. I mean, again, we started with a panel of around 10 people back in 2016, and we now have 75 people, which includes the likes of Bryce Blum from ESG Law, who is our panel chair, Alan Bryce, who is obviously a big talent in COD, who is our vice chair. And then we've had talents such as Golden Boy or Shocks be a part of that panel because they want to help shape on-air talent categories to be representative of something they'd want to win or something they'd want their peers to win over time. That helps us build out that process. I think the other key thing is growing with trends. So for us, we obviously have our entertainment awards, our industry awards, our pro awards, our on-air talent awards, and our collegiate awards. When we started, it was simply called Group 1 and Group 2. And that was everything. And in that, you had a mismatch of awards, whereas now there is more personality, more understanding, more areas to be able to achieve in these different areas overall. Like creatives was a big one for us, where basically every creative in the industry petitioned to make sure that they were recognized as a key part of this, because every show we watch has a look, a feel, a theme, and a vision that tells a story and a narrative. And there was no one out there who was creating a platform that would recognize them or give them that piece that they understand, that celebration effectively of what they're creating, because we have some of the best creatives in the world, period, let alone in the gaming industry. And that was an important part. So we sort of took it upon ourselves that we felt we had a robust enough platform that we could also cater for creatives effectively. And that's been the same with collegiate as well, as we've sort of expanded, is no one else is picking up the mantle to run with. We want to be representative of a grassroots award show in competitive gaming or a creative platform in competitive gaming. So we've sort of picked them up and said, hey, we can be the standard that sets this together, and then figure it out along the way. And again, that's where we've been very fortunate to have these panel members that will step in and help fill knowledge gaps or expertise and really sort of take over that adjudication process, with us running the technology, the processes, and the platform that enables it.
In terms of the categories which you found the most difficult in recent years, has there actually been a category which has been discussed, which is either in now or isn't even in the awards, which has been, whether it's been like hard to define or hard to kind of put into a category? And what was kind of like the hardest thing in choosing categories not to go into the awards as well?
That is a great question. So I'd say, if I can give you a very obvious one, in the first instance was our live event of the year. Has a very good identity, has a very good heritage and legacy. When COVID came along, we had to shelve that award and archive it because there were no live events, or there was only Riot being able to create live events, which meant it wasn't a fair dance floor for people to compete on at that point. So that was a category that our team cares a lot about, and we haven't been able to understand how we can roll that back out and what that should look like post-COVID. Overall. So that didn't make it in for this year, and that was a really tough call, because even at the end of 2021, we didn't understand what the landscape would look like, who would be competing from a live event perspective, and what that would be. And obviously, hindsight, it's been a phenomenal year for esports. We've got to see all of these events come back to life and showcase new personalities and new ways of working that, again, evidence the evolution of broadcasting within esports, which is really cool to see. I think one that probably hasn't been spoken about publicly, but has been a constant challenge for us, is actually content creator of the year. As a category. So that award initially was brought in, I believe, in 2019, and it was meant to be almost the video on demand version of Streamer of the Year. If Streamer of the Year encompasses everything live broadcast and entertainment, content creator was almost meant to be the video on demand version of Streamer of the Year. But never really took off in that way, because again, the community advocated for that award and loved it, and they wanted to shape it in a different way. They wanted it to embody more work. They wanted it to be a representation of live and video on demand content and all these different facets, but also just creation in general. And that meant there was a little bit of skewing with Streamer of the Year, a little bit of crossover. And then that award was started being very entertainment led, and then it became very almost trying to make it purist to no, this should just be specific esports content, guides, tutorials, instruction based videos, how to's, speed runs, and all of this different content that accompanies esports in general. And then what we've seen actually is now the trend is that it needs to be wider and fitting, because you have all of these massive co-streamers and secondary activations and different plans. And now you have this sort of struck balance between it, where you can appreciate where someone's gone above and beyond in recognition of esports, with someone like, say, like an eBay, who doesn't necessarily make esports content day in, day out, but continues to advocate for the scene. When he does do it, it's impactful. Versus someone like a Hex, who effectively day in, day out lives and breathes esports. Every vlog, you're going to get a behind the scenes of Optic. You'll get the highs, the lows. You have the podcast in which he's talking to some of the biggest personalities in and around the industry about their enjoyment of gaming or competitive gaming overall. But that was a tough one. And that was like an iterative process over 4 years that every year has needed to be redefined or reestablished to keep the award going. And in that time, you've almost seen a plot of different people come through as it's been adapted and evolved.
I guess it's really interesting, isn't it? Because, like I said, as esports continues to evolve, it's not like, football, which has been around for hundreds of years. You kind of know what you're going to get now with football. There's different categories that kind of come out, and yeah, like you said, the perception of those categories could change one year to the next. And like I said, with a perfect example of content creation. So we've kind of laid the founding now that all the categories have been set. and you go on to the nomination process. Now, I know that you do go in depth in your website about how the process actually occurs, but for people who haven't seen that, could you give like a brief explanation of how the nomination process is actually curated for a lot of these awards?
Definitely. I mean, it's a big process now. It's very robust. We've been so fortunate to work with some mega brands on building it out, from the likes of Deloitte, who laid the foundations of what a best in class and strategic governance process would look like within an award show way back in 2017, to all of the different consultants, and effectively where we are now, which is with our panel council that sort of help to tie the process, to keep it where it needs to be, and to sort of build it out. So again, it starts in January as the season starts. They set the parameters, they build out the list, it gets launched, it gets made aware, and then around March or April, nominations open, and at that point, the community have their opportunity to nominate in their masses for who they want to be up. The one thing we always caveat is it only takes one nomination to be considered and put in front of the panel from a community perspective. So although following will obviously play a part from a data perspective and showcasing how on demand some people are from a nominations perspective, if you have one nomination, there will be a consideration against your name. The caveat being, if you don't have a single nomination, it's very difficult to see you or for you to be evaluated for an award category you're interested in being up for. So that's why we allow self-nomination as well as community nomination, because you have the chance to say, do you know what, I may not have the biggest following, or I may not have someone to advocate for me, but I believe what I've done this year fits this category. I would love to see if my name can be up there. At that point, all of the community nominations are brought together. They are put into horrendously large spreadsheets and tables, and on a platform we use called Awards Force, and then contextualized for the panel so they can see award by award what the community feel, what the sentiment is, what the nomination reasoning is, what the split and percentages are. The panel then meet as a collective and discuss their own valuation and evaluation of the industry as it stands. So they go through and say, hey, we as an expert cover these titles. Here's who we think the strongest people are in certain categories or fields. And then other people have the chance to then add, disagree, contextualize, justify, and all of these different things. It takes a lot of hours to get through, and that's why we've split it out through the year. So although nominations opens in April, it closes at different times throughout the year for the categories. So the first one is entertainment, and the majority of the awards in the entertainment group are actually community voted. So they actually have 100% steer by the community. But the panel contextualize the community nominations. They come together, they make sure the shortlist is fitting, and then once they're live, anyone in those categories can win by the will of the public at that point, which is always a bit of a scary time, knowing how esports communities can work. And if it was done by Twitch chat, I'd probably never work in esports again. But is always a really cool process as well, because I think it's cool to see the support that people get and how that works. The other side is obviously the awards that are 75% panel decided, 25% community decided. So in a similar way, once the shortlist is live, the public can go and vote on them. They can nominate in their masses and vote in that way. And then in the year, at the end of the year, at this time really, the panel come back together. They go through a specific list, such as industry or creative or pro or on-air talent, and they go award by award. The finalists are invited to submit supporting information, whether that's a video, a PDF, a marketing brochure, or whatever they want to submit. They have that ability, and that will be evaluated on those calls by the panel. They'll go through all of that documentation. They will also go through key metrics such as wins, KDAs, percentages, MVPs, trophies, and all of these things, as well as things that are more subjective based on subject matter experts, such as their contributions that maybe don't always come down to metrics, but being an in-game leader or a shot caller, or all of these things. At that point, the panel will then sort of have their steer on who they feel should be winning that award, and it may be there are multiple people who should win that award. It may be that for a PC Player of the Year, someone in League of Legends, someone in CSGO, and someone in Valorant have all had very good years, and at that point they will try and reach consensus where possible, but everyone also has their own independent vote. So the 75 people, they all get to vote independently. They can agree, disagree, they can reach consensus. Those votes are then amalgamated with the community votes, put together, signed off by the adjudication body, and then given to us in envelopes effectively a couple of nights before the show, which is always a really exciting process.
It definitely seems like it's a very tough process, and kind of the amount of effort that you've gone to explain it, the actual process itself, kind of highlights how important this kind of process is. It's arguably probably one of the most important processes in the entire kind of awards, apart from maybe like the showcasing of the event itself. I guess like a couple of questions that I kind of want to ask regarding that is, how do you kind of avoid bias? Because there are obviously going to be panel members who, maybe if I just throw out a random esports organization, say that their player is up for PC Player of the Year, or there's an editor at a website and the journalist is up for Journalist of the Year. How do you kind of avoid the potential bias? And obviously, I'm not saying that these people are going to intentionally be like, oh, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. But it's hard for you not to feel like these people aren't going to support you that way.
It's difficult in esports because everyone knows everyone, but we have developed strategies that have allowed us to do it. Much easier when you have a panel of 16 people that don't represent orgs, but these days there is a much darker or deeper web of people that represent everyone effectively, which makes it more difficult. When you have 75 people on a panel, there is always going to be correlation or conflict. So at the nomination stage, because there is this open opportunity for community nominations, for panel nominations and evaluation, you are able to come forward and say, hey, these people have done very well, declare if you have a relationship with them, and then other people can again say, hey, actually, no, I disagree with you because of X, Y, and Z. And that's it. At that point, the nominations begin. Those people that do have a conflict of interest are blocked from nominating on any categories where they'd have an interest in elevating their career, getting financial gain from it, or any notoriety. So they get blocked from nominating. They aren't able to cast a vote on those. So, for instance, I don't like naming names because I always try and sort of shield the panel in that sense, but Brittany Johnson is someone who has relationships with different teams, different platforms. Anything where G2 could be a potential finalist, which is an organization she represents, she is unable to actually nominate or influence those categories in any way. And again, when it comes to voting, she must abstain in entirety from any category in which she may have a relationship. And it goes a lot deeper than that. Sometimes it's links that you may not think of. So for us, there are judges on there that own legal firms or other things that will have clients represented in categories that then will have to abstain from it, or will have relationships where they've guided or given expertise or evidence, or they represent them as talent, or someone they represent also works on a show that has representation attached to it that would benefit that agency in the future. They then have the same conflict of interest process, and sometimes it can be really tough for them as well because they want to support and help, but certain people on the panel tend to have ties to 90% of the industry, which means they actually only get to do around 10% of the adjudication because, again, they would have influence. They would stand to gain in some benefit if they were able to vote on categories or to have a position that may show bias. So it's a long drawn process. It's made more difficult by the fact that we are still growing as an industry and there aren't as many neutral bodies. But I like to think we are very aggressive in policing it and making sure that we get the right winner without any influencing factors.
I guess it's really difficult as well because it's like you need that industry knowledge. Like you can't just have people from Esports Awards, kind of mobile game of the year, FPS scout of the year, because I'm guessing not everyone at Esports Awards knows every single thing about the esports industry. Yeah. So it is,
and we don't get any votes as well. No one at the Esports Awards is on the panel or gets any say on that sense. We have one internal committee member, which is Aidan Redmond, and he sort of acts as that bridge between the Esports Awards and the panel. So ultimately, we don't actually get a steer or say in who wins the awards. We just help to provide context, data, understanding. We also have to do a lot around controversy. So have the players had any controversy that means that they shouldn't be seen to be winning an award or being nominated for an award? So we basically provide all of that intelligence to the panel, and then ultimately the panel council are the ones that actually get to help steer and push things in the right direction. And they're all visible and public facing on our website. You can sort of see who they are, but I think I've named most of them on the call anyway.
Yeah, I guess like the other thing as well, and talking kind of about defining the scope of a category itself within the selection process. I know that there was a little bit of community backlash on, I believe it was Journalist of the Year, where kind of it felt like not gatekeeping, but it felt like it was kind of just the esports media sites which were being kind of pushed for Journalist of the Year on those awards. And, you know, the likes of Digiday and other media outlets kind of didn't get that kind of that shine, really, essentially. What was the process kind of behind that? And obviously you did then, in the end, decide to celebrate these journalists as well. What was the internal process for all of that?
It was a big piece for us. And to be honest, holding our hands up on this, like, it was a very big learning, effectively, again, at how quickly this industry evolves, and actually the fact that mainstream and non-endemic media are paying so much attention and publishing such great work overall that we all enjoy and consume on a day-to-day basis. So I think from our perspective, when the shortlist went live, it was evident very quickly that it hadn't hit on everything that we wanted it to achieve. And ultimately, very quickly, the panel reconvened, the council came together and sort of said, we've missed the mark here. And then I think that's where I do really enjoy our process and the fluidity of being an awards body that is fairly new, is you have two decisions to make at that stage. Like, decision number one is, do you uphold the decision and the shortlist as it is and say, hey, we'll try and rectify this for 2023. Sorry for anyone who was let down or not represented despite being deserving. Or you can say, hey, we are progressive as an awards body and show this is something that needs to be addressed now because it's history at the end of the day, and it needs to be representative of those that were at the top of their game in 2022. And that's where I'm glad that we can always choose the progressive option. Even if for us it can leave us with a red face. I'd rather that we could sit there and take ownership of the gaps that we maybe had at that point to be able to rectify the situation and make sure those deserving are recognised, which is a really big thing for the panel themselves, but also our internal team as well. We work a lot of hours in putting this together. For us, one of the big highlights is always seeing those reactions to people being shortlisted and those vlogs and videos and reactions where you see someone actually see what it means to them. They're the bits that really keep us going and striving forward. And equally, you take it so personally when someone's disappointed or someone's upset, especially if you know you've missed the mark in that way overall. So effectively in that one, the panel council came together and they voted unanimously that we needed to re-explore this and reopen the category. That then went to the main panel to be able to vote on the award again with the new additions. That went down to then a final shortlist of, out of these new additions, which are the ones that you feel should be on the list for 2022. That went to the panel council for sign off. And then I believe Bryce Blum made a statement just issuing that this had happened and we wanted to make sure that it was rectified for this year. And then off the back of it, we've done a lot of work internally and with the panel to be better representative of where journalism is effectively in 2022 and 2023. So being able to cast a wider net, being able to speak with different experts in their field, and really just a plea to get people onto the panel that can help with a wider breadth of knowledge in that category. It's always difficult for us to profile exactly who sits on the panel and what their specialisms are, whether it's endemic press, non-endemic press, what games they work. We have a log, but again, when you have people that leave the panel year on year that maybe filled some of the knowledge gaps for the rest of the panel, it can be a difficult process. So we have a 365 policy on people joining the panel and applying to be a part of that panel. We'd always love to have people with a deep understanding of journalism, of media, to come and help with that process and make sure that long term we always recognize the right people.
Yeah, perfect. And like you said, you know, it's, as everything is kind of like developing and evolving, there's always going to be kind of mistakes that are made in any industry, isn't there, really? And it's kind of like kind of identifying them and, you know, and pushing through those. Right, I think I've grilled you a little bit enough on the selection process and everything like that, but let's talk about outside of the selection process. Let's actually talk about, like, how do you physically build an esports award show? Because I know that the main goal, you know, at the end of the the end of the road is the actual ceremony itself, but there's a lot more that goes into that to kind of build up this event as a whole, right?
There is, and I think this is where we come full circle on the conversation we had at the start around expectation. Because back in 2016, there was no expectation. We could have probably taken everyone to McDonald's, put some awards on the table, and everyone would have said, great, that's the best thing I've ever seen for an award show in esports. At that point, as you start layering and challenging yourself year on year to build more value for the esports ecosystem, that continues to stay there, and you have to resource against it, develop it, and build it. So one of the key things that we do is we try and keep a year-round presence through different means. We have our spotlight shows that actually showcase and unveil the finalists on a month-to-month basis, keep everyone in touch. We have our Play of the Month competition. We have our Community Play of the Month competitions, a whole host of different content that we build that effectively leads up to the big moment in December. Around that, we also have our business conferences we run to make sure that we're servicing the B2B side of the industry as much as we possibly can. And then you get to December, and we now have a 3-day mega event over 72 hours that requires a lot of planning, logistics, operations, and timing as you try and bring 300 finalists, 600 B2B to get delegates, and however many GA to Vegas for the show of a lifetime. So it's just evolved and grown so much. And even for me, seeing the destinations we've been in and how we've sort of forged forward is a really, really key part of that topic. So it's a lot of work. We've seen the team grow as the awards have grown up. But when you get to the awards and you see it all come together, it's such a worthwhile process and so exciting.
So let's talk about Esports Awards Las Vegas then, which is the one which is coming up in December. So I guess like the main thing to kind of talk about the topic of the actual event itself is how much time and effort goes into not only delivering a on-site experience for the people who are managing to kind of make it there, but also at the same time balance it out where you still have a great broadcast experience. Because I know that there's a lot of events where sometimes it can look really great in person, and then actually when you actually look at the broadcast, things just don't seem to work out, and vice versa. So how do you kind of balance that?
With a lot of difficulty and struggle, as everyone else will. Certainly don't get that side right as much as we'd like to, but I think every year the show gets better. It becomes representative of what the audience wants it to be and what we want it to be. I think the actual story of the awards has a lot of romance in it for me, and I hope most of the people that will watch the show or support the show because of the fact that it's grown so fast. I mean, we're a small independent company taking on Vegas at the moment, and I think that's a story in its own right. We started in London at the brewery, a small venue where we basically crammed as many tables as we possibly could in, built a stage with a projector and called it an award show. We then basically took every risk in the world in 2019 of moving this thing out to Arlington, Texas, to be the award show in the first dedicated esports facility at the Esports Stadium in Arlington. Had 5 months to plan every single part of that, from building these unique VIP experiences where we were closing theme parks or having home run derbies with famous Major League Baseball players and all these subsidiary events, and probably at the nth hour putting together a lifetime achievement show because people said, hey, you guys need to be documenting those that paved the way for everyone to work in an industry that we all love and care about. And putting that together in a pretty poorly lit room, effectively. So again, that was a 2 to 3 day experience, all of its own, moving to there. COVID hit in 2020, and all that work in moving us out to Arlington looked like it might not pay off because we'd stretched ourselves. We'd taken on a lot of liability and cost on the basis that we felt we could recoup in 2019 and 2020, 2020 and 2021. And then all of a sudden we are building out a CGI based ceremony because everyone's on lockdown, and we're based in the UK. We had a team in London, a team in Manchester. We had Shocks hosting virtually from Berlin in a studio. Then we had the team over in Arlington doing the broadcast and mixing for us, trying to bring all these hubs together to make sure we still had an Esports Awards. And then 2021, COVID, we're actually banned from the country under the presidential proclamation until November the 8th, and the show was on November 20th. So having not been for 2 years to America, you have 12 days start to finish to plan out and execute a 3-day event. in facilities that haven't been used for 2 years, and with technology that has sort of been sat dormant and not tested or not put together for this one of a kind event that is so unique in its own right. But for me, it was just exciting that we made it. There was just this real thing of like, if we can make it through this, hopefully we can make it through anything. And then fortune favors the brave, I guess. And we got this call from Kim Meltzer saying, hey, the team over at Resorts World want to meet you. They want to talk with you. They want to know what you're trying to achieve with the awards long term. And basically threw a lot of support at us to make it feasible to put us in a $4.3 billion mega resort, the most expensive resort ever built on American soil, with a $250 million at the heart of it, that is home to the Esports Awards. And that's a crazy journey and story that I think is almost entertaining and sort of gives you a reason and a compelling place to be to watch that show and enjoy that show because of the heritage and the way it's built out.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to see, how, and I think a lot of people actually, before I go on to my point, actually, I think a lot of people don't realize that the Esports Awards is a UK brand, because now it's so like embedded in the US with Arlington and now with Las Vegas. Is this kind of also a part of the expansion of having kind of the Esports Awards, but then having these other events? I know Level Up, I believe, is another one as well, which is happening, to kind of make it, I don't want to say it, but like a festival, essentially, like an actual event around
a best in class experience,
Yeah.
and a platform that caters to B2B, B2C, and everyone in between. I am always so excited for it, and honestly so grateful to, again, for us, the belief comes from the fact that we do this massive piece of work to persuade hundreds, if not thousands, of people to leave their homes, get on planes, and jump over to Vegas. Vegas makes it slightly easier. I will say there is that contest on my side that actually, Vegas makes it a little bit easier to persuade people to go to. Although I am such a big fan of Arlington still. So there's this like belief that actually we're getting people in for a minimum of 2 days anyway. Most of them fly in for 3 days and sort of make it a mini vacation in some ways, and a celebration, as well as an opportunity to network, to mingle, to develop business effectively. So for us, we know our lane. I feel we're very good at putting together this process, to building this show, and almost closing the curtain on the year in esports. That's where we play our role. And then we always look at other people who are thought leaders or better than us in the space that we could collaborate with to offer more value to that shared audience. And that's where I love that our platform is so open and we can basically go and play with everyone, because as you know, with the esports ecosystem, it can be very closed. You can't have publishers be seen to be working together. Lots of the teams don't like to work together and like to work in silos. Our event brings everyone back together and says, actually, you all get on. You're all good people that want to be in this industry, and gets everyone to play fairly. So that's where we were so excited to work with Esports Insider on building out these really cool curated experiences. We obviously have some phenomenal brands in the room. Esports Insider are exemplary when it comes to building out events that allow them to really harness the room, the value of being on a trip like this. And for me, it's the repeat of 2020, where we first built out and showcased Esports Assemble in a digital environment. We came together at the end of that year and said, how do we build something that means that this year can still matter, and you can still find a platform that will allow you to speak with new people, to build new relationships and forge ways forward? And that led to the first version of this, which was, I want to say, ESI Digital Winter, and at that point our Esports Awards conference. And then this is part two, where over 2 days you're getting this very unique opportunity where you have ESI curating and building a best-in-class breakfast event. And then on day two, we have our conference as well, where you'll get a blend of endemics, non-endemics, and all these brands. I think Sam at first wanted to keep this to like a 30 to 50 people breakfast. I think at this stage it's probably about 150. And I think ours is up to about 350, which I still need to get through budgeting at some point. But just shows the span and the scale and support, but also just the credibility of that audience, because you have some of the biggest VPs and C-suites in the world coming down to support because they actively want a role in competitive gaming and they want to support and see how this grows and how they can influence that. And that's why why I'm so excited about it, is when you come into town now, the awards are great, but you're actually being able to come in and do 2 days of solid work where you can do all of these different conferences and all of these opportunities. And then each night you have a show where you can go and meet the people that you've been speaking with through the day, have a drink, watch day one for us, our lifetime achievement mixer, in which everyone comes together to showcase and celebrate those faces that paved the way. And then day two, obviously, close the curtain with the Esports Awards itself.
And who are some of the, it's time for a bit of a name plug, who are some of the names that are actually coming to ESI Las Vegas? I don't know if you can say all of the big names that are coming through, but who are some of them?
There's lots of big names, some that want anonymity, and I don't have a list of them right now, but I'm very excited to come down for this. Obviously, a medley of our sponsors will be there, the likes of Lexus, Verizon, Tyson, Plarium, Roland have some really cool activations planned out, and then there's just a plethora of the teams that will be represented in the room, the likes of G2, 100 Thieves, Optic, Loud, and all of these sort of super brands that have really started to build out very strong identities and really sort of showcase the way forward for esports, that will be sharing their thoughts, how they see things and what they're really striving to achieve in the industry.
It does actually make me go on to 2 points, but I actually want to go with the teams first. Does it kind of validate you that the fact that you have these, massive non-endemic, massive non-endemic and endemic brands and teams wanting to come to these events? Because I guess sometimes it's good to have awards, but actually when you can't get that person physically there and accepting it, it, as from a broadcast standpoint and probably from an event standpoint, it doesn't feel as grandiose as what it could be. But do you think it kind of gives you like a seal of approval that all of these brands are kind of willing to come to this event?
Definitely. I think it just backs our process to make this matter. For us, we obviously get a lot of controversy around processes and things like Journalist of the Year if it doesn't fit, but we always answer it. We're always adaptable and we always want to be agile to the industry to make this matter. And that's why it's so important that we face up to things and almost crowdsource how the awards should work and make it so that everyone can have their say. Anyone can voice how they think this should work or run or be made going forward. And I think that's why it resonates, because people see that and they see that the industry shapes it, the community shapes it, and the panel interprets it to be put back out. And that means by the time you actually get to the stage where you're on that shortlist, thousands of hours have gone into that process and hundreds of hours have been spent understanding if you should be there, which makes it matter, in my opinion. That's why it's something that you can't buy this. You can't bias it. You can't create conflict that puts it into your pocket. You have to go out there and be the best at what you do to pick up that trophy. And I think that's why people get to that point and they look out and they see that stage and they think, that's the award I want to win. Like, that's where I want to be. That's the peer recognition and celebration I want to be a part of. And the other thing for us is our key pillars that we sort of live by, which are recognizing excellence, creating legacy, and honoring industry. And that's why we sort of build out these things that mean that they stand the test of time. And as you said, right, like this has been going since 2016, which is only a 7-year period. Yet our first ever breakthrough game was Overwatch, because Overwatch was just being released at that point. And you think in 7 years, the journey that Overwatch has gone to the point where it's launching Overwatch 2 now, is huge. Like, the franchising wasn't actually a concept in esports the first time we ran the Esports Awards. That all started coming in the end of 2016 and the start of 2017. There were no permanent partners. It was all sort of relegation-based systems and no revenue share from the publishers. And even that is something that we've been able to track and identify and showcase. And I think even for like a team like 100 Thieves, there's this really cool thing where they came in and made such a splash and had this real piece where like they could compete, but they were brand new and they were doing some things that disrupted the market, such as their apparel. That meant that people saw them for that first and saw them as competitive second. And you had them do some really cool stuff in COD before it went to permanent partnership. And then they dropped out in 2019 because it wasn't a competitive market for them. It wasn't something that justifiably made sense. And then they came back, like they were back at the end of 2020. They were back in and they launched with a lot of furor around it. Did some pretty impressive stuff in their first year, built a great identity with LA Thieves. They started winning in League of Legends and sort of showcasing and evidencing that actually 100 Thieves are a competitive powerhouse that within a very short amount of time have became one of the central points of esports teams. And that led to them winning Esports Organization of the Year in 2021. That was a big defining moment for Matt and John and the whole team, where they got to lift that trophy and actually say, you know what, whilst we don't need the validation, this is like the gratification that we competitively are on the playing field, and we're at the top echelon of that. And I don't know, that's like a very important part and a very exciting part of why this matters.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess one thing that I also wanted to talk about was the sponsors as well. Obviously, there's a plethora of sponsors that are actually, sporting the Esports Awards. I know it sounds like a very silly question, but how crucial is it to have the backing of sponsors? Is that like the main way that Esports Awards is kind of able to continue year on year?
Yeah, I would say so. I like to think we're very transparent. Sponsors for everyone in the industry at this point is crucial. We're still at a point where media rights are very, very young from an esports perspective, and people are understanding how you monetize on that side. It's very difficult to sustain a platform like this. And again, as we said, there is expectation where we can't just drop things. We can't just wake up one day and say, hey, we're going to drop these 10 awards because we can't afford to run them anymore, or we're going to drop these shows through the year, or we're not going to run business conferences. The expectation is always it's bigger, better, stronger, effectively, like this thing grows and accelerates. Fortunately, with that, obviously, it translates to large and mass scale viewership, where we've gone from 80,000 to 21 million people watching, and that represents real value back to the non-endemics and the endemics of the industry that support and allow us to achieve. So it's a big part of it. There is obviously other facets, from hospitality through to media distribution, but sponsorships has been the real way that we've been able to deliver this. But I also think add value, because we want sponsors that want to be here. What we don't want is logo slaps, because we're very fortunate that as an award ceremony, we have a very positive sentiment. And we know that if we just slapped every single logo up on the wall for a check, people would turn it off very quickly. They'd see through it very quickly. So we've always challenged our partners to be engaged and embrace what we do, to be a part of it. And you've seen it over the years that we've got to do these really, really cool activations and sponsorships that allows us to forge forward. So Coca-Cola was a great example last year of a sponsor who came on and wanted to provide value. So for them, they came on board because there was obviously this time that stood still in COVID, where everyone was at home. There was a lot of negativity in the press and you couldn't escape it. So for us, there was always an interpretation that people had forgotten how to have fun and we didn't know how to live again. So Coca-Cola came on board and partnered with us, and they obviously presented Personality of the Year, but they also provided all of these experiences that were documented on creators' socials, and were also influenced by those watching at home, who could vote on the experiences, they could control the experiences and tune in, even if they weren't able to access and be a part of the awards in person for 2021. So they obviously closed the theme park. That's the end point of this. Is they went to Six Flags, they closed it down, and they allowed 30 of our attendees to go around the park with no queues, unlimited midway games, and basically have that once in a lifetime experience we all dream of as a kid, as we stood at Alton Towers for 3 hours waiting to go on a ride, where the park's empty. You get to go on every ride. You can ride as many times as you want, and they built that out and curated that experience. That was what they came in and sponsored, was the opportunity to help people to reestablish how to have fun, whether it's you controlling these creators' experiences, whether it's you as a creator getting to go and have that experience and document it to your audience. And that's something we do across the board. Lexus have been very, very good with us at supporting the vision, the journey, the elevation of the awards from Arlington to Vegas, and also some of the things that really are in tune with our audience. When they first did this in 2019, they brought in different models of their vehicles to showcase at the awards that were in tune with what we all love. They had the car from Marvel and Black Panther there. They had the Men in Black 4 car there, which are the actual cars used in the films, which were then showcased to our audience. And you got to actually experience these as though you're at the premiere, and were one of the only events that get that experience. They did the Eternals last year, where the Eternals launched, and we had those vehicles there. And they also had the Lexus game at IS, which is their concept car that they built, that had streaming rigs built into it, and water cooling and nanoleaf lights and all these really cool things that are sort of in tune with either things that fans would love to experience or those VIPs love to experience as well. So for us, it's always important that it stays true to what we'd want it to be, and that it is in keeping with our audience and also our own values. But there's also a lot of fun that you can have with it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And honestly, Mike, I think we could talk for another hour about media rights and sponsorship, definitely. But
Absolutely.
unfortunately, we don't have that much time. That'll be for the part two. That'll be part two, purely media rights and sponsorship opportunities.
I did try and warn you that I'm a talker.
That's absolutely fine. I love it. But to kind of conclude the podcast then as a whole, it's a bit of an open-ended question, but it's something that I do like to ask people in general because it's always good to see what's next. It's like, what are some of Esports Awards like future goals? What are some of like the things which maybe not even now, maybe not even 2 years, 3 years, but what is like a future goal for Esports Awards?
It's a very good question. There's a lot that I can't talk about that we are trying to do in the future for the betterment of the industry, to showcase things in the right way. I think to create more identity around the subgroups of the awards, to help with the voting process on those, the adjudication and the steering going forward. There's a lot we want to do to make sure that each set of awards feels like it's true to that audience. So such as industry and categories like journalists, we want to make sure that they have the right people adjudicating and the right amount of support to them, and even the distinction for it, because we're almost a catch-all in the industry now, because one, we went first, and two, we've made our mission to recognize those deserving, no matter what. So we have all these different groups where we're recognizing creatives, we're recognizing industry folk, we're recognizing the pros, and we want to make sure that we can almost reverse engineer that to ensure that we are doing it in the right way and in the right manner. And if it means that they take on their own personalities as almost mini shows, then so be it. That's something we want to do, because we don't want to drop anything. I think that's the thing, is like, we don't want to drop collegiate unless there's someone else that's willing to pick it up and make sure that that has the recognition and gets what it deserves. We want to keep building and improving and growing. It's very hard to top Vegas, if I'm honest. Like, the event that we're running on the 11th, 12th, and 13th will be the most ambitious and daring that we've ever taken on. We obviously have our Celeb Pro-Am golf tournament that we are running with Golf and Gaming Club, which is its own crazy, unique experience with pro golfers, pro gamers combined and colliding on the golf course. And then we have the 2 business conferences, 2 ceremonies, all within 72 hours. We're very excited about it, slightly nervous at the same time. Obviously, you want it to be a rip-roaring success, but we want to get Vegas out the way, and then maybe we'll start talking and sharing some of that ambition again.
Yeah, that's perfect. Obviously, it's going to be a very stressful few days, but it's the more stressful it is, the more rewarding it is, I guess, at the end of it is what they say anyway. But yeah, like I said, I appreciate you coming on for this podcast. I really enjoyed actually talking a little bit more about the Esports Awards, why it's important, and then also a little bit into kind of like the recent news that kind of came out and everything in between. I really appreciate the transparency for actually discussing some of these topics as well. But that has been the industry though, and I appreciate it. And hopefully, if you like seeing more of this stuff and seeing me and listening to me, then I do an ESI digest, which I run through a week's worth of news. And then we also have a whole range of podcasts. We have ESI for All as well, which is our diversity podcast with the great Riley. A lot of new content that we're trying to kind of push. And yeah, hopefully everybody enjoys it. And I'll see you next time.